Thanks for joining. My name's Sawley Mosdale, and I'm studying Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Oxford. And I'm, incredibly passionate about journalism, and that's what's brought me to do this internship. Really, I thought it was an incredibly useful way for me to gain some valuable skills and learn a bit more. So I've chosen my article about refugees in a camp called al-Hol in northeast Syria. And these refugees are essentially IS affiliated or potentially IS affiliated women and children. And many of their husbands are in prison in the region. So why did I choose this internship? I thought it provided me with a valuable set of skills, from recording podcasts, article writing, article research, and creating infographics as well. All incredibly valuable skills for a future career in journalism. I was particularly interested in the topic of the internship. I'm very passionate about refugee issues. Many articles I've written, parts of student journalism articles, have focused on the issue of refugees, and I think it resonates a lot with readers, including Gen Z, because these are people that are suffering, and you want to know more about them. You might see images online, but you need to read articles behind it to really understand their position. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about the situation in the camp. So there is a main camp section which houses predominantly Iraqi and Syrian nationals, and then there is the annex which houses foreigners, and they are mainly from North Africa and Europe. I think it's important to note that the majority of people in al-Hol camp are children. Now, the conditions in this camp are abhorrent. There is a serious lack of medical care and worrying levels of violence, with crime-related deaths being the most common cause of death in 2021, according to MSF reports. There's also issues with repatriation. Many foreign governments do not want to bring back their nationals, and in extreme cases have stripped them of their citizenship, leaving them without any form of protection. And they see local prosecution as a much more favourable alternative to this, and it lets the Kurdish administration in northeast Syria deal with their nationals, and the Iraqi courts likewise. So why is it important that we talk about this issue and really try and understand it? Well, primarily we want to avoid a resurgence of extremism and avoid a potential future rise of radical groups. And we need to start with the children. There is a whole new generation growing up in al-Hol camp who, some of them, all they've experienced is war. They've been born in war. Some of them have been born in the camp. And this is incredibly worrying and concerning for the international community as well. The potential for radicalization is particularly concerning. There are many IS hardliners within the camp, and there's no sort of policing within al-Hol. So kids growing up here can very easily get in with the wrong people and develop, radical views, extremist views. We can see that they already resent camp authorities. There's a lot of stone throwing when authorities are in the camp, and at the same time, the camp authorities are very repressive. There's a lot of midnight raids. They just take property and detain people for various issues. So it's a difficult atmosphere of sort of two opposing sides within al-Hol. And on top of that, the kids, all they've known is war. So their views are, all based on this and their experiences. And we can see that, radicalization is a worrying thing in these camps. The previous leader of IS, Omar al-Baghdadi, lived in a camp not too dissimilar from this one, not too dissimilar from al-Hol. we need to avoid anything like this happening again. I also think it's important that we talk about this issue because scenes of suffering are always worrying to see, and there should be a drive amongst everyone to deal with issues like this and suffering. And I think the reason that this suffering has maybe gone under the radar, or not under the radar, but has been almost ignored by some, is that there's just a lack of interest in dealing with people that are viewed as former IS members. Many foreign governments have no desire to deal with the issue, and are quite happy to let them remain in camps with awful conditions such as this one. And I think it's shown by the fact that there are not many NGOs and aid organisations working in al-Hol. You've got MSF running 3 mobile clinics in the annex for foreigners, and several clinics in the main camp, but there's a serious lack of medical care for the 70,000 residents in the camp, and there's some local NGOs as well, but there's a serious a lack of aid going in. And maybe that's obviously because people deem them to be IS affiliates, but you have kids there that have been born in the camp or are only a couple years old, and can they really be seen as guilty as IS members? Some of those kids have done nothing wrong at all. And so this issue needs to be investigated further and find ways of supporting people in the camp, whether that's just raising awareness, or whether the international community needs to come together and put some funding behind these camps. The actions of the West are concerning. Essentially, most Western governments, they don't want to deal with the problem. They've had many foreign nationals have left their respective nations in Europe and North Africa, and have gone to join IS, and they're being radicalized. And now some of them that are remaining are in camps such as al-Hol, and this puts an incredible strain on al-Hol, on the Kurdish administration of northeast Syria. They're dealing with Turkish airstrikes, several other rebel groups, and they, as well as trying to reconstruct their region, they don't have the finances to go through and prosecute all these foreign nationals, and they've said themselves that they will not prosecute the women and children in al-Hol. Their prisons are filled with men, and the foreign men as well, that there's just no space to put them. And so it's worrying that countries like Britain and France are quite happy to leave their citizens there, where they can't be properly prosecuted and dealt with. And that prosecuting could result in them gaining their freedom, or it could result in imprisonment. But they essentially don't have that option, and they're left in limbo in camps such as al-Hol. We've seen Britain has opted for citizenship stripping to deal with the issue. We can see in Shamima Begum's case that she was deemed as a security risk and had her citizenship stripped. This is a really worrying way to deal with the problem. It's a really inefficient method. It almost just breeds more radicalization, and because it leaves these people without a possibility to either clear their name, to be rehabilitated, or imprisoned. And as I said before, it leaves them in limbo. It leaves them in a camp with awful conditions. So governments have opted for local prosecution instead of repatriation. But this has come with a whole new set of issues, with the judicial process in northeast Syria and Iraq being deemed inadequate by many. There was a very hasty trial in Iraq where 4 French nationals were sentenced to death, and many French lawyers criticised the government for having allowed this to happen. These people were arrested and sentenced in a trial that did not share the same values as a French court back in France. So something must be done with the issue with the foreigners, and also to improve conditions in the camp before issues such as radicalization, become, at the forefront once again. So yeah, thank you very much for listening.